Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I know you're here because you can't sleep, or maybe you just love a good scary story. Either way, you're in the right place. Tonight, I've got 10 stories for you. Some are from people I know personally. Others were sent in by listeners just like you. A few of them still keep me up at night, if I'm being honest. These aren't your typical campfire tales. These are real experiences from real people. The kind of things that make you question what you think you know about the world. So get comfortable. Turn off the lights if you're brave enough. And let me tell you what happened to some folks who weren't expecting their lives to take a turn into the strange and terrifying. Let's get into it. My Uncle Ray worked as a lighthouse keeper up in Maine for almost 30 years. This was back before everything got automated, back when they actually needed people living out there to keep the light running. Ray was perfect for the job. He didn't like crowds, didn't like small talk, and he sure as hell didn't mind being alone. His wife had passed away in the late 70s, and he didn't have any kids, so the solitude suited him just fine. The lighthouse he worked at was called Seal Point Light, about 15 miles up the coast from Rockland. It sat on this rocky outcrop that got completely cut off from land during high tide. When the tide went out, you could walk across this narrow strip of rocks and seaweed to get to the mainland, but you had about a 6-hour window before the ocean came back and turned the place into an island again. Ray lived in the keeper's cottage right next to the tower. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was all he needed. He'd spend his days maintaining the light, reading books, and watching the seals that gave the place its name. I visited him there exactly once, back when I was 17. My mom thought it would be good for me to spend some time with Ray before I went off to college, said I should know my family better. I took a ferry out to Rockland, then Ray picked me up in his truck and drove me to the access point. We waited for low tide, then walked across those slippery rocks to the lighthouse. I remember thinking how isolated it felt, even though you could still see the mainland. The first couple of days were fine. Ray showed me how everything worked. How to trim the wick, how to clean the lens, how to keep the rotation mechanism oiled. It was actually pretty interesting, learning how something built in 1847 still functioned perfectly. At night, we'd sit in the cottage, and Ray would read while I messed around with my Walkman. This was 1989, so that was peak technology for me. The radio didn't get great reception out there, but I could usually catch a rock station out of Portland if the weather was clear. On the third night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. I'm not sure why. Maybe I heard something, or maybe I just had to piss. Either way, I sat up in the little cot Ray had set up for me in the main room. The lighthouse beams swept through the window every 30 seconds, filling the room with this bright white light before plunging everything back into darkness. I'd gotten used to it by then. I was about to get up when I heard footsteps outside. Not on the rocks, but on the wooden walkway that circled the cottage. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone pacing. I figured it was Ray checking something, maybe inspecting the tower before the tide came in. But then I heard his snoring from the bedroom. Ray snored like a chainsaw. There was no mistaking it. Someone else was outside. I got up and went to the window, being careful not to make noise. The next time the lighthouse beam swept around, I looked out. There was a woman standing on the walkway. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see in a Civil War photograph. Her hair was long and wet, hanging down past her shoulders. She was facing away from me, looking out at the ocean. The beam moved on, and she disappeared into darkness. When it came back around, she was still there, but she'd turned slightly. I could see her profile now. She looked young, maybe early 20s. Her skin was pale, almost gray in the lighthouse beam, and she wasn't moving. Not breathing, not swaying with the wind, nothing. She just stood there. I backed away from the window. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might wake Ray up. I considered waking him, but something stopped me. Maybe I was scared he'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was scared he'd tell me who she was. I went back to the cot and pulled the blanket over my head like a little kid. I know how that sounds, but I didn't know what else to do. The footsteps continued for another hour, just pacing back and forth. Then they stopped. In the morning, I asked Ray if he'd heard anything during the night. He said no, he slept like the dead. Then he asked why I was asking. I told him about the woman, about the dress, the wet hair, the way she just stood there. Ray put down his coffee mug. He looked at me for a long time, and I couldn't read his expression. "That'll be Sarah," he finally said. I asked who Sarah was. Ray got up and went to a drawer in the kitchen. He pulled out an old photograph and handed it to me. It showed a young woman in a dark dress, standing in front of Seal Point Light. The photo was old, probably from the 1920s or 30s, and it was the same woman I'd seen on the walkway. Sarah Cobb, Ray said. She was the lighthouse keeper's daughter back in 1931. She and her fiancé were supposed to get married, but he got drunk the night before the wedding and drowned trying to swim out to the lighthouse. They found his body washed up on the rocks 3 days later. I asked what happened to Sarah. She walked into the ocean, Ray said. Same night they found his body. Didn't leave a note or anything. Just walked right in, dress and all, and never came back out. I felt cold despite the summer heat. Ray took the photo back and put it in the drawer. She shows up sometimes, usually when there's going to be a storm. I figure she's still looking for him. I asked if he'd ever tried to talk to her. Ray shook his head. Some things you don't interfere with. She's got her own purpose. I've got mine. We coexist just fine. I left the next morning. Told Ray I wasn't feeling well, needed to get back to the mainland. He didn't argue. He just drove me to the access point at low tide and told me to take care of myself. I never visited Ray at the lighthouse again. We'd talk on the phone occasionally, but I never went back. Ray retired in 1997 when they finally automated the light. He moved to a small apartment in Rockland, and he seemed miserable there. He'd spent so long in isolation that being around people made him anxious. He died 2 years later, heart attack in his sleep. At the funeral, my mom told me Ray had left me something in his will. It was in a small wooden box. Inside was the photograph of Sarah Cobb. There was a note with it, in Ray's handwriting. She'll be waiting for someone. Thought you might want to remember her. I kept the photo. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I felt like I owed her something, even though I'd been too scared to acknowledge her that night. Sometimes I wonder if Ray talked to her after I left, if he told her I was sorry for being afraid, if he kept her company during those storms. I like to think he did, and I like to think that when Ray died, maybe she stopped waiting. Maybe she finally found who she was looking for, or maybe she's still out there, pacing that walkway every night, looking out at the water. I don't know, but I still have that photograph, and sometimes, late at night, I take it out and look at it, and I swear to God, every single time, her expression is slightly different than I remember. That story still gives me chills. My Uncle Ray was one of the most practical, no-nonsense people I ever knew. If he said he saw something, he saw it. Our next story comes from a listener who worked security at a hospital. And if you think hospitals are creepy during the day, wait until you hear what happens there at 3 in the morning. This story was sent in by a guy named Marcus, who worked hospital security in Atlanta for about 5 years. He sent me a long email, and I've edited it down a bit, but these are mostly his words. I worked night shift security at Mercy General from 2015 to 2020. It wasn't a bad gig, quiet most of the time. You'd get the occasional drunk trying to start something in the ER, but usually it was just me and 2 other guards walking around a mostly empty building for 12 hours. The hospital had been built in the 1950s, and they'd added on to it over the years. The result was this confusing maze of hallways that connected old sections to new sections. Some parts were still in use, some were closed for renovation, and some were just abandoned. The 4th floor of the original building was one of those abandoned sections. It had been the psychiatric ward back in the day, but they'd moved all those services to a new facility in the 80s. The 4th floor had been empty ever since. Hospital administration kept saying they were going to gut it and turn it into something useful, but they never did. It just sat there, locked up, with all the old furniture and equipment still inside. We weren't supposed to go up there unless there was an alarm or a report of a break-in, but honestly, nobody wanted to go up there anyway. The place had a vibe, you know what I mean? Like even without knowing its history, you'd walk past the stairwell door marked 4th floor, authorized personnel only, and you'd just feel wrong about it. My first year, I managed to avoid the 4th floor completely. Whenever there was a door alarm up there, which happened maybe once a month, I'd send one of the other guards. I told myself it was because I was the senior guy and could delegate, but really, I just didn't want to deal with it. Then in year 2, I got partnered with this new guy named Jerome. Jerome was fresh out of the army, and he didn't believe in ghosts or bad vibes or any of that. He thought the 4th floor stories were just hazing for new employees. One night, around 2 in the morning, we got a door alarm for the 4th floor. Jerome volunteered to check it out, said he'd been wanting to see what all the fuss was about. I went with him because, honestly, I didn't want to look like a coward. We took the stairs up. The 4th floor door was heavy, with one of those push-bar emergency exits. The alarm panel next to it was flashing red. Jerome pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The hallway lights were off, but our flashlights cut through the darkness well enough. The floor was covered in dust. The walls still had those old green tiles, the kind that look like they belong in a 1950s mental hospital, which is exactly what they were. The hallway stretched out in both directions. Doors lined both sides, most of them closed. Jerome reset the alarm panel, and the beeping stopped. We started walking down the hall, checking the doors to see if any were open. They were all locked, which was standard. We got about halfway down the hall when I heard it. A voice, singing. It was faint, coming from somewhere deeper in the ward. A woman's voice, singing something I didn't recognize. No words I could make out, just this melody that sounded old, like a lullaby. Jerome heard it too. He stopped walking and looked at me. "Someone's up here," he said. I wanted to say no, wanted to say it was just pipes or the wind or anything else, but I couldn't. It was definitely a voice. We followed the sound. It led us to a set of double doors at the end of the hallway. The sign above them said, "Day Room." The singing was coming from inside. Jerome pushed the doors open. The day room was huge, probably 40 feet across. There were old couches and chairs arranged around the edges, and big windows that looked out over the city. The moon was bright that night, so we could see pretty clearly even without the flashlights. Sitting in one of the chairs, facing the window, was a woman. She was wearing a hospital gown. Her hair was long and gray, hanging down her back, and she was singing that same melody, soft and low. Jerome called out to her, "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be up here." She stopped singing, but she didn't turn around. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt very, very cold. Jerome walked toward her. I stayed by the door. He got about 10 feet away before he stopped. "Marcus," he said quietly, "come look at this." I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But I walked over anyway. The woman wasn't moving, not breathing, not shifting, nothing. And as I got closer, I could see why. She wasn't real. I mean, she was there, I could see her, but she wasn't solid. I could see through her, just slightly, like looking through a dirty window. And she was old. Not just old like gray-haired old like ancient. Her skin looked like paper, and her hands resting on the armrests looked like they'd been dead for decades. Jerome backed up slowly. He was done pretending he wasn't scared. The woman started singing again. The same melody, but this time I could make out some of the words. It was in another language. Maybe German? I wasn't sure. And then she turned her head and looked at us. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just black. We ran. I'm not proud of it, but we ran like hell. Back through the day room, through the double doors, down the hallway, and into the stairwell. We didn't stop running until we were on the first floor. Jerome quit the next week, said he was going back to school, but I knew the truth. He'd seen enough. I kept working there, but I never went back to the fourth floor. Whenever there was an alarm, I'd just call it in and let the day shift guys handle it. About 6 months later, I was talking to one of the older nurses, a woman named Dolores, who'd been at Mercy since the 70s. I asked her if she'd ever heard stories about the fourth floor. She got real quiet. Then she told me about a patient named Greta Hausman. Greta had been committed to the psychiatric ward in 1957 for what they called melancholia back then, basically severe depression. Greta never left. She lived on the fourth floor for almost 30 years. She'd spend her days sitting in the day room, singing German lullabies her mother had taught her. When Greta died in 1985, she was still sitting in that chair by the window. The nurse who found her said she looked like she'd been dead for hours, but she was still warm. They closed the fourth floor 6 months later. Dolores told me that over the years, a few people had reported seeing a woman up there, always in the day room, always singing. I asked if anyone had tried to, I don't know, help her move on or whatever you're supposed to do with ghosts. Dolores just shook her head. Some people get stuck, and I don't think Greta minds. She loved that room. I think she's exactly where she wants to be. I left Mercy General in 2020, but I still think about Greta sometimes. I wonder if she's still up there, sitting in that chair, singing her mother's lullabies, and I wonder if she's waiting for something, or if she's already found it. Hospitals, man. They've seen so much death over the years, it's no wonder they hold on to a few ghosts. This next story is different. It's not about ghosts or spirits. It's about something physical, something that shouldn't exist but apparently does. This comes from a park ranger in Oregon who had an encounter in the woods that he still can't explain. I'm a park ranger at Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. Been doing this job for about 12 years now, and I've seen a lot of weird stuff in the woods. Bears acting strange, hikers getting lost in areas they shouldn't be able to get lost in, equipment malfunctioning for no reason. But what happened 3 years ago is the only thing that's ever made me question whether I should keep doing this job. It was late September, just before the park was about to close for the season. We'd had an early snow, and most of the trails were already inaccessible. The few tourists we still had were sticking close to the visitor centers. I was doing a final patrol of the West Rim Trail, making sure all the trail markers were still in place, and checking for any damage from the snow. It was about 4 in the afternoon, and the sun was already starting to get low. The West Rim Trail runs along the crater's edge, and there are a few spots where you can look straight down into the lake. It's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. The cliff edges are unstable, and every few years someone gets too close and the ground gives way. I was about 3 miles into the patrol when I saw the footprints. They were in the snow, leading off the main trail and heading toward the tree line. That wasn't unusual by itself. People went off trail all the time, even though they weren't supposed to. But these footprints were weird. They were barefoot, in the snow. I've seen some dumb things from tourists, but walking barefoot in freezing snow is suicidal. I figured someone was having a mental health crisis, so I radioed it in and started following the tracks. The footprints led straight into the forest, weaving between the trees. Whoever made them was walking normally, not running or stumbling, just walking. I followed for about half a mile. The forest was dead quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just the sound of my boots crunching in the snow. Then the footprints stopped, not at a road or a clearing. They just ended, mid-stride, in the middle of the woods. One print, then nothing. I looked around, thinking maybe they'd climbed a tree or jumped to avoid leaving tracks. But there was nothing. No branches low enough to reach. No disturbed snow anywhere nearby. The tracks just ended. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it. Then I heard something behind me. I turned around, and there was a man standing about 30 feet away. He was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and thin. Too thin. His arms looked like they should snap in the wind. He was wearing a dark coat that hung loose on his frame, and his face was pale, almost white, and he was smiling at me. "You lost?" I called out. He didn't answer, just kept smiling. I took a step toward him, and he took a step back, maintaining the exact same distance between us. "Sir, this area isn't safe," I said. "You need to come with me back to the trail." He tilted his head to the side, like a dog hearing a strange noise, and then he spoke. "Do you know where you are?" His voice was wrong, too deep, like it was coming from a well. I told him we were in Crater Lake National Park, about a mile from the West Rim Trail. He shook his head slowly. "No, you're at the edge." I asked him the edge of what. He pointed behind me, toward where the footprints had ended. I looked back at the spot, then turned to him again. "What are you talking about?" But when I turned around, he was gone. Not walking away, not running, just gone. I pulled out my radio and called for backup. Told them I'd found a potentially dangerous individual in the woods and needed assistance. 2 other rangers met me within 20 minutes. We searched the area for over an hour. We found the barefoot tracks. We found the spot where they ended. We even found my own footprints where I'd been standing when I talked to the man. But we found no trace of him. No footprints leading away, no disturbed snow, nothing. One of the rangers suggested maybe I'd imagined it. Said the altitude and cold can mess with your head sometimes. But I know what I saw. I've been back to that spot a few times since then, always during the day, always with someone else. The area feels wrong. It's hard to explain, but it's like the forest is holding its breath. I've done some research on the area, talked to some of the older rangers who've been here longer than me. Turns out there's been stories about that section of woods for decades. People see things there, figures in the trees, shadows that move wrong, and almost everyone who reports it says the same thing. Whatever they saw told them not to go past the tree line. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't know if it was a person, or a spirit, or something else entirely. But I know I won't be going back there alone. And if you ever find yourself at Crater Lake, on the West Rim Trail, and you see barefoot tracks leading into the woods, don't follow them. The woods hold secrets. That's just a fact. The older a forest is, the more it's seen, the more it remembers. This next story takes us to the Appalachian Mountains, where something has been living in the hollers for longer than anyone can remember. My grandmother lived in a holler in eastern Kentucky until she died in 2003. The holler didn't have a name on any map, but locals called it Blackwater Holler because of the creek that ran through it. Nana's house was the last one at the end of a dirt road that climbed up into the mountains. She'd lived there her entire life. Born there in 1921, raised there, married there, buried her husband there in 1978. When I was a kid, I'd spend summers at Nana's house. This was in the 90s, before everyone had internet and cell phones. Going to Nana's meant being completely cut off from the world. No TV, no phone, just the woods and the creek in Nana's stories. Nana had rules, a lot of them, and she didn't explain them, she just expected you to follow them. Rule 1, don't go into the woods after dark. Rule 2, if you hear someone calling your name from the woods, don't answer. Rule 3, if you see a woman in white near the creek, come back to the house immediately. Rule 4, don't whistle at night. Rule 5, if something knocks on the door after midnight, don't answer. I was 10 years old the first time I broke one of Nana's rules. It was late July, just after sunset. I was sitting on the porch with Nana, watching fireflies in the yard. Nana had just gone inside to make tea when I heard it. Someone calling my name. Jacob. It came from the woods, maybe 50 yards from the house. A woman's voice, soft and sweet. Jacob, come here. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. The voice called again, this time from a different direction. Jacob. I stepped off the porch. I don't know why. It's like the voice had a hook in me, reeling me in. I walked across the yard toward the tree line. The voice kept calling, moving deeper into the woods. I was about 10 feet from the trees when Nana's hand clamped down on my shoulder. She spun me around and slapped me across the face. Hard. I started crying, and she pulled me back to the house without saying a word. Once we were inside, she locked the door and closed all the curtains. Then she sat me down at the kitchen table and told me the story. When Nana was a little girl, her older sister disappeared. Her name was Ruth, and she was 14 years old. One night, Ruth heard someone calling her name from the woods. She went to investigate, and she never came back. They searched for weeks. The whole community came out to help. They found nothing. No body, no clothes, no sign she'd ever been there. A year later, Ruth came back. She walked out of the woods one morning, wearing the same dress she'd disappeared in. She didn't look hurt. She didn't look different. She just walked up to the house and knocked on the door. Nana's mother opened the door, and Ruth smiled at her. Mama, Ruth said, I'm home. But Nana's mother knew something was wrong. She said Ruth's eyes were wrong, empty. And when Ruth spoke, it sounded like Ruth's voice, but the words came out just a little too slow. Nana's mother slammed the door and told everyone to get away from the windows. Ruth stood on the porch for an hour, knocking and calling out. Mama, let me in. I'm cold. I'm scared. But Nana's mother knew it wasn't really Ruth. Whatever came back from the woods was wearing her daughter's face, but it wasn't her. Eventually, Ruth stopped knocking. They heard footsteps walking off the porch and back toward the woods. When they looked outside the next morning, there were muddy footprints leading from the tree line to the porch and back. But the footprints weren't human. They were too long, too narrow, almost like a deer's hooves. Nana said that whatever took Ruth sometimes tried to lure other people into the woods. It learned names, learned voices, and it would call out, trying to get you to follow. She made me promise I'd never go into the woods after dark. I promised. I kept that promise for years. I spent every summer at Nana's, and I followed all her rules. Until the summer I turned 17. It was my last summer before college. Nana was getting older, and I knew these visits were numbered. I'd brought a friend with me, a girl from school named Ashley. Nana didn't usually allow visitors, but she made an exception. Ashley thought the rules were funny. She'd make jokes about them, asking Nana if Bigfoot was going to get us if we whistled. Nana didn't laugh. One night, Ashley and I were sitting on the porch. It was just past midnight, and Nana had gone to bed. Ashley heard something in the woods. Footsteps. Someone's out there, she said. I told her it was probably a deer, but then we heard it. A voice. Help me. It was a child's voice. Young, maybe 6 or 7. Please, I'm lost. Help me. Ashley stood up. There's a kid out there. I grabbed her arm. Don't. Jacob. There's a kid lost in the woods. We have to help. She pulled away and started walking toward the tree line. I followed her, trying to get her to stop, but she wasn't listening. We got to the edge of the woods. The voice called out again. I'm cold. Please help me. Ashley pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. She stepped into the trees. I should have grabbed her, should have tackled her to the ground if I had to, but I froze. She walked about 20 feet into the woods, shining her light around. Hello? She called out. The child's voice answered. I'm here. Ashley walked deeper. I watched her flashlight bobbing between the trees. Then the light stopped moving. "Ashley?" I called out. No answer. "Ashley." Her scream cut through the night. High-pitched, terrified, lasting only a few seconds before it cut off. I ran back to the house and got Nana. She called the sheriff, and they came with search dogs and spotlights. They found Ashley about 100 yards into the woods. She was unconscious, lying in a creek bed. She was alive, but she wouldn't wake up. They took her to the hospital in Hazard. She was in a coma for 3 days. When she finally woke up, she couldn't remember anything about that night. The last thing she remembered was sitting on the porch with me. She didn't remember hearing the voice, didn't remember going into the woods, didn't remember screaming. The doctors said it was trauma-induced amnesia, but I knew better. Whatever was in those woods had tried to take her, and when it couldn't, it erased her memory of it. Nana died 2 years later. She left me the house in her will. I've never spent a night there. I can't. Just driving up to it makes my skin crawl. I tried to sell it, but no one wants it. The locals know about Blackwater Holler. They know about the rules. The house still stands, empty, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm having trouble sleeping, I think about that voice in the woods, the one that called my name when I was 10. The one that sounded just like my mother. The Appalachian Mountains are old. Older than the Rockies, older than most mountain ranges on Earth. And with that age comes stories that go back generations. Our next story stays in rural America, but this time we're heading to the Midwest, to a farmhouse that should have been empty. I grew up on a corn farm in central Illinois. Our family had owned the land since the 1890s, about 800 acres of flat farmland that stretched out as far as you could see. Every fall, from September through October, we'd harvest the corn. My dad and my 2 older brothers would spend 12 to 14 hours a day on the combines, cutting down rows and rows of dried stalks. I was too young to operate the heavy machinery, so my job was to drive the grain truck. I'd follow alongside the combine, and when the hopper got full, they'd pour the corn into my truck bed. When the truck was full, I'd drive it to the silo and unload. It was boring work, but I didn't mind. I'd listen to music, watch the hawks circling overhead, and think about football season starting up at school. This was 1997. I was 15 years old. We had one field that we always harvested last. It was the farthest from the house, about 2 miles down a dirt road. The field backed up against a tree line that marked the edge of our property. My dad called it the South 40, even though it was way more than 40 acres. It was just what his dad had called it. Nobody liked working the South 40. It always took longer than it should. Equipment would break down for no reason. The combine would jam up on stalks that weren't any different from the ones in other fields. Tires would go flat on perfectly good roads. My oldest brother, Mike, said the field was cursed, said there was something wrong with the land. My dad would tell him to shut up and get back to work. We started harvesting the South 40 on October 23rd. The weather was good, clear, and cool. We figured we'd have the whole field done in 3 days. On the first day, I made maybe a dozen trips between the field and the silo. Each trip took about 20 minutes. Drive to the field, wait for the hopper to fill my truck, drive back, unload, repeat. Around 5 in the evening, I was heading back to the field for what I thought would be my last trip of the day. The sun was getting low, and my dad liked to quit before dark. I was about halfway down the dirt road when I saw someone standing in the field. It was a woman. She was wearing a long dress, dark colored, and she was standing perfectly still about 30 yards off the road. I slowed down and stopped the truck. Figured maybe she was lost or needed help. I got out and walked to the edge of the field. "Hey," I called out. "You okay?" She didn't move, didn't turn around, just stood there. I walked a little closer. "Ma'am?" That's when I noticed her feet. They weren't touching the ground. She was hovering about 6 inches above the soil. I backed up slowly, my eyes locked on her. She still hadn't turned around. I got back in the truck and drove to where my dad and brothers were working. I told them what I'd seen. Mike believed me. He always believed in weird stuff. But my dad said I'd probably just seen a scarecrow or a trick of the light. I insisted there was a woman floating in the field. My dad sighed and climbed down from the combine. "Show me." We drove back to the spot in my truck. I pointed to where I'd seen her. There was nothing there. "You sure this is the spot?" my dad asked. I was sure, but she was gone. My dad told me I'd been working too long and needed to rest my eyes. We called it a day and went home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman in the field, about the way she'd been floating. Around midnight, I heard the combine start up. I got out of bed and looked out my window. I could see lights in the distance, way out where the South 40 was. Someone was harvesting. I went downstairs and found my dad standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the lights. "Who's out there?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. We got in his truck and drove out to the South 40. When we got there, we found both combines running, cutting down corn in perfect rows, but nobody was driving them. The cabs were empty. My dad ran to the first combine and climbed up, shutting it off. I ran to the second one and did the same. We stood in the field, in the dark, listening to the silence. "What the hell?" my dad whispered. We checked the combines thoroughly. The keys were in the ignitions. The machines were in perfect working order. There was no reason they should have started on their own. We drove them back to the barn and locked everything up. The next morning, my dad called a priest from our church. Father Donnelly came out to the farm, and my dad explained what had happened. Father Donnelly blessed the field, walked up and down the rows with holy water, saying prayers in Latin. It seemed to work. We finished harvesting the South 40 without any more incidents. But 3 months later, in January, my dad had a massive heart attack while feeding cattle. He died before the ambulance could get there. At the funeral, Father Donnelly pulled me aside. He told me he wanted to show me something. He drove me out to the South 40, to the spot where I'd seen the woman. "Your great-great-grandmother is buried here," he said. I didn't know what he was talking about. Father Donnelly explained that in the 1890s, when the farm was first established, our family had a small cemetery on the property. Just a few graves for family members who died before the town cemetery was established. When they started planting the South 40 in the 1920s, they moved most of the graves to the town cemetery, but one grave got left behind. My great-great-grandmother, Sarah. Sarah had died in childbirth in 1896. The baby died too. They were buried together in a simple grave marked with a wooden cross. When they moved the other graves, they couldn't find Sarah's. The wooden cross had rotted away, and nobody remembered exactly where she'd been buried, so they just planted over her. Father Donnelly said he found records of it in the church archives when he was looking into the farm's history after the combine incident. "She's still down there," he said, "under the corn." I asked why she'd appeared to me. Father Donnelly shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe she was trying to warn you. Maybe she was asking for help." We never harvested the South 40 again. My brothers and I sold the farm in 1999, after my mom died. We couldn't keep it running without Dad. The new owners planted soybeans there for a few years, then eventually sold the land to a developer. There's a subdivision there now, 100 of houses, all built on what used to be farmland. I wonder if the people living there know about Sarah, about the woman in the dark dress buried beneath their homes. I wonder if any of them have seen her, standing in their yards at night, floating just above the ground, still waiting to be found. The dead don't always rest easy, especially when they've been forgotten. This next story comes from the Pacific Northwest, from a small town where something strange has been happening for over 100 years. I was a mail carrier in Stillwater, Washington for 7 years. Stillwater is a tiny logging town about 40 miles north of Seattle. Population maybe 800 people. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where nothing ever happens, where you'd think being a mail carrier would be the most boring job in the world. And for the most part, it was, except for one house. The house sat at the end of Maple Street, the last house before the road turned into forest. It was a small craftsman-style house, built sometime in the 1920s. White paint that had faded to gray, a porch with a swing that nobody ever sat in. The house belonged to a woman named Eleanor Price. Eleanor was in her 80s when I started working the route. She lived alone, no family that I knew of. She was always pleasant when I saw her. She'd wave from the window or the porch. Sometimes she'd come out and chat with me about the weather or ask if I'd seen her cat, a fat orange tabby named Rusty. But there was something off about Eleanor's mail. Every single day, she'd get letters. Not bills, not catalogs. Letters. Handwritten envelopes with stamps from all over the country. And every single letter was addressed to Eleanor Price. But the return addresses were all from people with the last name Price. Robert Price, Portland, Oregon. Margaret Price, Nashville, Tennessee. Thomas Price, Boise, Idaho. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured Eleanor had a big family that liked to write letters. It was unusual in the age of email, but not unheard of. But then I noticed something weird. The handwriting on all the letters was the same, every single one. Different return addresses, different stamps, but identical handwriting. I asked another mail carrier, Jerry, if he'd noticed it when he used to run the route. Jerry just shrugged and said, "Yeah, Eleanor's mail was weird, but it wasn't our job to ask questions." Fair enough. Things got stranger about 2 years into working the route. I was delivering Eleanor's mail one afternoon when I noticed the front door was open. Not wide open, but cracked. Like someone had gone in but forgotten to close it all the way. I knocked. "Eleanor, mail's here." No answer. I knocked again, louder. "Eleanor?" Still nothing. I pushed the door open a little more and stuck my head in. "Eleanor, you okay?" The house was dark, curtains drawn, but I could see into the living room from the door. Eleanor was sitting in a chair by the fireplace. She was facing away from me, toward the window. "Eleanor?" I said again. She didn't move. I stepped inside. "Eleanor, I'm sorry to barge in, but your door was open, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." That's when I saw them. Letters, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were everywhere, stacked on tables, piled on the floor, stuffed into every available space. All opened, all read, and they were all in the same handwriting. I walked closer to Eleanor. "Eleanor?" I touched her shoulder gently. She was cold. I stepped back and pulled out my phone to call 911. Eleanor had been dead for at least a few hours. The paramedics came, then the sheriff. They confirmed what I already knew. Eleanor had died of natural causes. Heart failure, probably. They asked me a few questions, took my statement, and said I could go. But before I left, I asked the sheriff about the letters. He looked around at the piles and piles of envelopes. "Yeah, we're going to have to sort through all this. See if there's any family we need to contact." I told him about the return addresses, about how they were all from people named Price. The sheriff picked up a letter and looked at it. Then he picked up another, and another. "Huh," he said. "That is weird." 3 days later, the sheriff called me, said he wanted to ask me a few more questions about Eleanor's mail. I met him at the house. The inside had been cleaned out. All the letters were gone. "We went through every letter in this house," the sheriff said. "Over 2,000 of them, all addressed to Eleanor Price. All from different people with the last name Price." He paused. "Except none of those people exist." I didn't understand. The sheriff explained. They'd tried to trace the return addresses. Every single one led to a vacant lot, an abandoned building, or an address that didn't exist. Robert Price, Portland, Oregon, lived at an address that was a parking lot. Margaret Price, Nashville, Tennessee, lived at an address that was a demolished church. Thomas Price, Boise, Idaho, lived at an address that had never existed. None of the people who supposedly sent the letters were real. "So who was sending them?" I asked. The sheriff shook his head. "We don't know. But here's the really weird part. We checked the postmarks. These letters were mailed from all over the country, going back decades. Some of them are from the 1970s. He handed me one of the letters. It was yellowed with age. The postmark said 1973. "We opened a few of them," the sheriff continued. "They're all the same, just a single sentence." I opened the letter he'd given me. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line written in careful cursive. "We're still here." I felt cold. "Who's we?" I asked. The sheriff shrugged. "No idea. But whoever was writing these letters kept it up for over 40 years, and they made sure Eleanor got one every single day. They never figured out who was sending the letters. The investigation eventually went cold. Eleanor was buried in the Stillwater Cemetery. No family came to the funeral. Just me, the sheriff, and the priest. About a week after the funeral, I was delivering mail on Maple Street. When I got to Eleanor's house, which was still empty and waiting to be sold, I found something in the mailbox. A letter, addressed to Eleanor Price. Return address, William Price, Stillwater, Washington. But the address listed was Eleanor's own house. The handwriting was the same as all the others. I took the letter to the sheriff. He opened it. Inside was the same message. "We're still here." The sheriff and I stood there in his office, staring at the letter. "Should we do something?" I asked. He put the letter in a drawer and locked it. "What are we going to do? We can't arrest a ghost." I kept delivering mail to that address for another 5 years before I quit. And every single week, without fail, a new letter would appear in Eleanor's mailbox. Different return addresses, different cities, but always the same last name, always the same handwriting, always the same message. The house sold eventually. A young couple with a baby bought it. I wanted to warn them, but what would I say? Your house gets ghost mail? I moved away from Stillwater in 2018, but I still think about Eleanor and those letters. I wonder if the new owners are getting them too. I wonder if they're opening them. And I wonder who we are and why they're still here. Some mysteries don't want to be solved. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Our next story takes us underground, literally, to the mining tunnels beneath Pennsylvania, where something has been lurking for over a century. My grandfather worked in the coal mines outside Scranton, Pennsylvania for 38 years. He started when he was 16, right after dropping out of high school, and didn't retire until his lungs gave out in 1989. Gramps was a practical man. Didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in superstition, didn't believe in anything he couldn't see or touch. But there was one thing he believed in, one thing he never questioned: the knockers. In mining culture, knockers are supposed to be these little creatures that live deep in the mines. Some people say they're goblins or gnomes. Others say they're the spirits of dead miners. According to legend, the knockers would knock on the walls of the mine shaft to warn miners about cave-ins or gas pockets. 3 knocks meant danger, get out. Most miners treated it like a joke, a way to explain away the natural sounds of rock settling and timbers creaking. But not Gramps. Gramps told me once that he'd heard the knocking exactly 3 times in his 38 years underground. The first time was in 1955, when he was 24 years old. He was working in a deep shaft, about 800 feet down, with a crew of 6 other men. They were drilling holes for explosives to loosen up a coal seam. It was hot, loud work, the drill bits screaming, the rock dust choking, the smell of sweat and diesel fuel. Then someone said, "Stop." They all stopped drilling. In the sudden silence, they heard it. Knock, 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 clear as day. 3 distinct knocks, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond their work lights. The foreman, a man named Kowalski, immediately ordered everyone out. They didn't ask questions. They just grabbed their gear and started moving toward the shaft elevator. They were about halfway there when the ceiling collapsed behind them. Tons of rock and coal crashed down, filling the tunnel they'd just been working in. If they'd been 30 seconds slower, they all would have been buried alive. The official explanation was a weak seam of rock that gave way under pressure. But Gramps knew better. The knockers had warned them. The second time was in 1971. Gramps was working in a different mine by then, a newer one with better ventilation and more modern equipment. He was a shift supervisor, responsible for a crew of 15 men. They were checking the ventilation fans one afternoon when Gramps heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, nobody else heard it, just Gramps. He ordered his crew out of the shaft anyway, told them there was a problem with the fan and they needed to clear the area. His men looked at him like he was crazy. The fan was working fine, but they followed orders. 5 minutes after they evacuated, there was an explosion. A pocket of methane gas had built up near the fan. When the fan motor sparked, it ignited. The explosion destroyed the entire section of tunnel. If Gramps and his crew had still been there, they'd all be dead. The company investigated. They wanted to know how Gramps had known there was a gas buildup when all the sensors said everything was fine. Gramps couldn't tell them the truth. He just said he'd smelled something off and decided to be cautious. They gave him a commendation for his quick thinking, but Gramps knew it wasn't his thinking. It was the knockers. The third time was in 1988, a year before he retired. Gramps was doing a final inspection of an old shaft that was being permanently sealed. Just him and a new guy, a kid fresh out of high school named Tommy. They were about 1,000 feet down, checking to make sure all the equipment had been removed before they filled the shaft with concrete. That's when Gramps heard the knocking. Knock, knock, knock. He grabbed Tommy's arm. "We need to go, now." Tommy asked why. "Don't ask questions, just move." They started heading back to the elevator, but Tommy was young and curious, and he wasn't moving fast enough. Gramps heard a 4th knock. That had never happened before. The knockers always stopped at 3. He turned and saw Tommy standing still, looking at something in the darkness beyond their lights. "Tommy, come on." But Tommy didn't move. He was staring at something. "Mr. Walsh," Tommy said quietly, "there's someone down here." Gramps shined his light in the direction Tommy was looking. At first, he didn't see anything, just rock walls and timber supports. Then he saw them, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, small figures, maybe 3 feet tall, with pale skin and huge black eyes. They were crouched on the walls, on the ceiling, on the floor. All of them perfectly still, and they were all staring at Gramps and Tommy. Gramps grabbed Tommy and pulled him toward the elevator. Tommy was too shocked to resist. They ran, Gramps' bad lungs screaming, his heart pounding. Behind them, he could hear more knocking. Not 3 knocks, dozens of knocks, all around them, echoing through the shaft. They reached the elevator and Gramps hit the button. The cage started rising, painfully slow. As they ascended, Gramps looked down into the shaft. The small figures were following them, climbing up the walls, moving impossibly fast, their black eyes never blinking. The elevator kept rising. 200 feet, 300 feet. The figures were getting closer. At 500 feet, they stopped. All at once, like they'd hit an invisible barrier. They just clung to the walls, watching as Gramps and Tommy rose to the surface. When the elevator reached the top, Gramps and Tommy stumbled out. They were both shaking. Gramps told the site supervisor to seal the shaft immediately. Don't send anyone else down. Just fill it with concrete and be done with it. The supervisor asked why. Gramps said there was structural damage and it wasn't safe. They sealed the shaft 2 days later. Gramps retired a year later. His lungs finally gave out from decades of breathing coal dust. He died in 2003, at age 72. Before he died, he told me about the knockers, about what he'd seen in that shaft with Tommy. I asked him what he thought they were. He said he didn't know. Maybe they were spirits of dead miners. Maybe they were something that had always lived in the deep places, long before humans ever dug into the earth. But he knew one thing for certain. They'd saved his life twice, and the third time, they'd shown him their faces. As a warning, or a goodbye, he wasn't sure. But he never went back underground after that, and he made me promise I'd never work in the mines. I kept that promise. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those creatures. Still down there, still knocking, still watching. The earth is deeper than we think, and the things that live down there have been there a lot longer than we have. This next story brings us back to the surface, to a road trip that went very, very wrong. In the summer of 2006, my best friend Chris and I decided to drive from Phoenix to Denver. We were both 21, just graduated from college, and wanted one last adventure before starting real jobs. We left Phoenix around 6 in the morning, planning to drive straight through. It was about 14 hours, but we figured if we took turns driving and didn't make too many stops, we could be there by 8 or 9 that night. The drive went smoothly for the first 7 hours. We made it through Arizona and into New Mexico without any problems. We stopped for lunch in Gallup, then got back on I-40 heading east. Around 2 in the afternoon, somewhere between Gallup and Albuquerque, Chris said he needed to use the bathroom. We just passed a rest stop, so I told him we could pull over at the next exit. But the next exit never came. We drove for an hour, then 2 hours. The GPS said there should be exits every 10 or 15 miles, but we weren't seeing any. The highway just kept going, straight, empty, disappearing into the horizon. Chris was getting desperate. Man, I really need to stop. I told him we'd pull over on the shoulder if we had to, but I wanted to find an actual exit. Then we saw the mile marker 117. We'd been watching the markers go by, 98, 99, 100, 101. They were progressing normally, but then we saw 117. Just like that, we jumped from 103 to 117. I asked Chris if he'd seen that. Yeah, he said. That's weird. We kept driving. The next marker was 118, then 119. We'd somehow skipped 14 miles of highway. I tried the GPS. It was showing our location, but the map was blank, like we were driving through empty space. Chris tried his phone. No signal. We kept driving. The road looked the same. 2 lanes in each direction, separated by a median. Desert on both sides, but something felt wrong. There were no other cars. We hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. No cars, no trucks, nothing. And the sun hadn't moved. It was stuck at the same angle it had been when we first noticed mile marker 117. Late afternoon, casting long shadows, but not getting any lower. We need to turn around, Chris said. I wanted to, but there was nowhere to turn around. The median was too wide, and there were no exits. We kept driving. Mile marker 130, mile marker 135, mile marker 140. Then we saw it, a car on the side of the road. It was a red sedan, pulled over on the shoulder. The hood was up, like it had broken down. I slowed down as we passed it. There was someone standing next to the car. A woman, middle-aged, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. She waved at us. Chris said we should stop and help her. I didn't want to. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. But Chris was already unbuckling his seatbelt. Dude, we can't just leave her out here. I pulled over about 50 yards past her car. Through the rearview mirror, I watched her walk toward us. She was smiling. She got to the passenger window. Chris rolled it down. Thank God, she said. I've been stuck here for hours. My phone isn't working. Her voice sounded normal, friendly, but her eyes were wrong. They were too dark, like someone had colored them in with a marker. Chris asked her what was wrong with her car. "I don't know," she said. "It just stopped. One minute I was driving, the next minute the engine died." She asked if we could give her a ride to the next town. Chris looked at me. I shook my head slightly. "Sorry," I said to her. "We're trying to make good time, but we can call a tow truck for you when we get somewhere with signal." Her smile didn't change. "You won't get signal out here." "We'll keep trying," I said. Her smile got wider. "You don't understand. There's no signal here. There's no towns. There's no nothing." Chris shifted uncomfortably. "Where exactly are we?" "You're here," she said. "That's all you need to know." I put the car in drive. "We need to go." She reached through the window and grabbed Chris's arm. Her grip was too strong. Way too strong. "Don't be rude," she said. "I'm asking nicely." Chris tried to pull his arm away, but he couldn't. I hit the gas. The car lurched forward, and the woman let go. Chris yanked his arm back inside and rolled up the window. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the road, still smiling, watching us drive away. We didn't talk. We just drove. Mile marker 150, mile marker 160, mile marker 175. Then, finally, we saw it. An exit sign. Albuquerque, 20 miles. I took the exit. The ramp curved down, and we merged onto a different highway. Suddenly, there were other cars. The GPS started working. The sun started moving again. We pulled into the first gas station we saw. Chris ran to the bathroom while I filled up the tank. When he came back, he rolled up his sleeve and showed me his arm. Where the woman had grabbed him, there were bruises, dark purple, in the exact shape of fingers. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the drive. We just wanted to get to Denver. That night, in the hotel, I looked up mile marker 117 on I-40 inches, New Mexico. According to the maps, there is no mile marker 117 on that stretch of highway. The markers go from 103 to 104. No jump, no gap. But we were there. I know we were. And I know we saw that woman. Chris still has the bruises. They never completely faded. And sometimes, late at night, he says he can still feel her grip on his arm. Cold, impossibly strong. Like she's still holding on. There are places that exist between places. Roads that lead nowhere. And if you're unlucky enough to find yourself there, you might not find your way back. This next story is shorter, but no less unsettling. It comes from a friend of mine who used to work the night shift at a convenience store. I worked overnight at a 7-Eleven in suburban Chicago from 2010 to 2012. The shift was midnight to 8 in the morning. Boring as hell, but the pay was decent and I could do homework when it was slow. Most nights, I'd get maybe 10 customers total. Truckers stopping for coffee, insomniacs buying energy drinks, the occasional drunk buying munchies. But there was one regular who always came in at exactly 3:17 a.m. I don't know why I remember the exact time, but I do. 3:17, every single night. He was an older guy, maybe 65 or 70. Always wore a gray suit, even though it was 3 in the morning. Always carried a leather briefcase. He'd come in, nod at me, walk to the back where we kept the refrigerated drinks, and grab a bottle of water. Same brand every time. Then he'd come to the counter, pay an exact change, and leave. Never said a word beyond thanks. This went on for months. Every night, 3:17, like clockwork. I started to wonder about him. Where was he going at 3 in the morning in a suit and tie? Why did he always buy water from my store instead of keeping some at home? One night, I decided to ask. When he came to the counter, I said, "You come in here every night. What's got you up so late?" He looked at me for a moment. His eyes were gray, like his suit. "Work," he said simply. "What kind of work do you do at 3 in the morning?" He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. The kind that never ends. He paid, took his water, and left. After that, I didn't ask anymore, but I started noticing something weird. The man never aged. I worked there for 2 years, and he looked exactly the same every single night. Same gray suit, same gray hair, same expressionless face, and he never drank the water. I'd watch him through the window as he walked to his car. He'd get in, place the water bottle in the passenger seat, and drive away. One night, curiosity got the better of me. After he left, I went outside to see which direction he drove. He always turned right out of the parking lot. Always. So one night, I followed him. I closed the store early, something I'd never done, and got in my car. When he left, I followed at a distance. He turned right, like always. Then he drove for about 2 miles before turning into an industrial park. I followed him in, keeping my headlights off. He parked in front of an old warehouse, the kind that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Broken windows, graffiti on the walls, weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. He got out of his car, carrying the water bottle and his briefcase, and walked to the warehouse entrance. The door was chained shut, but he walked right through it. Not around it, through it. I sat in my car, staring. After a few minutes, I got out and walked to the warehouse. The door was still chained, padlocked, hadn't been opened in years. I looked through a broken window. Inside, I could see rows and rows of desks, old metal desks with typewriters on them. And sitting at every single desk was the man in the gray suit. Dozens of him, maybe hundreds, all typing, all identical, all wearing the same gray suit. I ran back to my car and drove back to the store. I never followed him again, but he kept coming in, 3:17 a.m., every single night. I quit in 2012 and moved to California, but sometimes I wonder if he's still going to that store, still buying water, still driving to that warehouse, still typing, forever. Some people are trapped in routines they can't escape, doing the same things over and over, even after death. This final story is different from the others. It's not scary in a traditional sense, but it's unsettling in a way that's hard to explain. It's about my grandmother, and what she told me 3 days before she died. My grandmother died in December 2019. She was 93 years old and had been in declining health for about 2 years. The last week of her life, she was in hospice care at a facility near my parents' house. We all knew it was coming. The doctor said it was just a matter of days. I visited her 3 days before she died. It was a Tuesday afternoon. She was in and out of consciousness, heavily medicated for pain. I sat with her for about an hour, holding her hand, not saying much. Then she opened her eyes and looked right at me. "They're here," she said. I asked who was here. "The others," she said. "The ones who are waiting." She smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in weeks. "They've been here for days," she continued, standing in the corner, watching. I looked at the corner she was indicating. There was nothing there. "What do they look like?" I asked. "Like people," she said. "But not quite right. Too tall. Too thin. And their faces." She trailed off. "What about their faces, Grandma?" "They don't have eyes," she said. "Just smooth skin where their eyes should be. But I can feel them watching me anyway." I told her it was probably just the medication making her see things. She shook her head. "No, they're real. They've always been real." She paused, catching her breath. The effort of talking was exhausting her. "I've seen them before," she said quietly. I asked when. "All my life," she said. "Since I was a little girl. They'd show up in my room at night, stand in the corner and watch me sleep." She'd never mentioned this before. Never. "I thought everyone saw them," she continued. "I thought it was normal. But I learned not to talk about it. People thought I was crazy. I didn't know what to say. They're not scary anymore," she said. "I used to be terrified, but I've had 93 years to get used to them." She squeezed my hand weakly. "I think they're here to help, to guide me through." "Through what?" I asked. She looked at me with clear, lucid eyes. "The next part." She closed her eyes and didn't say anything else. I thought she'd gone back to sleep, so I just sat there, holding her hand. About 20 minutes later, she opened her eyes one more time. "Tell them," she said. "Tell who?" "Your family. Tell them it's not scary, dying. It's just stepping through a door." She took a long breath. "And they're on the other side, waiting. They've always been waiting." Those were the last words she ever said to me. She died 3 days later, peacefully, in her sleep. At the funeral, I told my mom what Grandma had said, about the tall, thin figures with no eyes, about how she'd seen them her whole life. My mom got very quiet. Then she told me that when she was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, she'd woken up in the middle of the night and seen a tall figure standing in the corner of her room. She'd screamed, and Grandma had come running. But instead of being alarmed, Grandma had just smiled and told her it was okay, that they wouldn't hurt her, that they were just watching. My mom had forgotten about it until that moment. We never talked about it again. But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up and feel like I'm being watched. I'll look at the corner of my room, and I swear I can see something there. Tall, thin, perfectly still. And I wonder if I'm seeing what Grandma saw, what my mom saw. And I wonder if they're waiting for me, too. standing in the corner, patient, ready to guide me through, when it's my time to step through that door. And that's it for tonight. 10 stories. Some explained, some not. Some with happy endings, and some, well, some don't have endings at all. I hope these stories gave you something to think about. Maybe kept you company while you couldn't sleep. Maybe made you check the corners of your room one more time. If you've got a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. You can send it to me through the links in the description. And if you want more stories like these, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thanks for spending your night with me. Stay safe out there. And if you hear something knocking in the dark, maybe don't answer. Until next time.